Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Archiware P5 webinar Wednesday. I'm David Fox there on the left-hand side from JPY in the UK. Do a lot of work with Archiware, training videos, articles, and webinars like this one. And my guest this afternoon is Robert Krueger over there on the right, managing partner at Lesspain Software. And Robert has a media asset management product called KYNO that we will be looking at in some detail a little further down into the webinar as an example for you of a media asset management system, because that's what we're talking about this afternoon. And so Robert has a MAM called KYNO, and KYNO is a nice example of both a media asset management product and also one that integrates with Archiware, and one that's nice and simple. So it's a good thing for us to use to give you an overview of MAMs, maybe if you don't have much experience of them, and also a MAM which integrates with P5. So Robert, hi. Do you want to just say a quick hello? Make sure the audio is working.
Hi David. Thank you very much, and thanks to Mark and the entire Archiware crew for the invitation. It's a perfect opportunity, and I'm looking forward to this webinar.
Excellent. So to kick off, we're going to talk a little bit about what is a media asset management system, because I'm sure a lot of you already know, people that are working in media and broadcast will very likely be using MAMs, but then I always bump into a lot of people at trade shows that aren't yet using one and maybe don't realize that there's a whole gamut of different MAM scales, going from really simple stuff up to really sophisticated enterprise stuff. So what is a MAM? Seem to have a transition on that slide. Okay, so a few bullets here just to talk around to introduce the concept. So on the left, top left there, I have some sort of typical features of MAMs. On the right, we'll just talk a little bit about the kind of processes and life cycle progression that a MAM can actually allow within what you're doing in your work. And then at the bottom, some processes that are assisted outside of the MAM. So going back to top left, I always used to think of a MAM as something which gives you better functionality for locating and managing a bunch of files than just a file system. So at the simplest level, you can have a folder on your local hard drive, and you can manage a bunch of projects and have subfolders and so on. But as things scale up, especially into teams, then you need better ways of organizing and categorizing your assets. So maybe not just because assets are in a folder, they belong to a project, but maybe you have assets that you don't want to have multiple copies of that will exist across multiple projects. So a MAM will let you categorize maybe a logo or something that you're going to use in lots of places, so you don't have to have multiple copies of it, but you can assign it to lots of different projects. A MAM will typically give you much better ways of visualizing your assets via thumbnails and proxies, maybe even transcoding to make sort of proxies that are usable in your edit software for you at the same time. So you have much better visualization of assets that you've maybe grouped into projects. And we can also, a big part of a MAM is metadata. So MAMs can capture metadata and allow you to search and manage projects around the metadata. Metadata being the simplest form of metadata is the file name of an asset. That's the first piece of metadata, but then you'll have embedded capture dates and camera models and apertures, and maybe keywords and descriptions that have been hand coded into the assets that allow those assets to be located later. So all of that stuff can be exposed, managed, and input through typical MAM software. A MAM provides access to your assets. So when you've got maybe thousands of video assets that you're viewing through the MAM, you can kind of forget about double clicking on items within the Finder or the Windows Explorer, and you'll use the MAM as the mechanism through which you get to access the assets and maybe pull them into a nearline editor, or sorry, non-linear editor, NLE, or opening a graphics in Photoshop or whatever, but you'll probably manage opening and saving files through the MAM. And when you've finished with an asset, or maybe when you've got large assets in the system that you don't want to keep there for too long because they're taking up a lot of space, you can migrate to other storages. So that could be something like P5, where you might archive off to tape or disk, or it could be just moving things between faster, more expensive disks to kind of middle range, slower disks, depending on how fast you need to be able to access those assets. Subclip creation is something that we'll be looking at through KYNO as well in a few minutes. So subclips is where you have one maybe quite long piece of video, but you chop it up into small sections and annotate and name those sections, so that those are the clips that you want to pull into your NLE software to actually make a TV program or movie out of. So those are the features of the software with a MAM, and the processes that are assisted are things like ingestion of media from cameras. You can immediately start to add metadata and generate proxies as soon as the stuff's coming in from cameras. And then as soon as you've done that, it becomes searchable because you've added metadata at the very start of the process, so you can search and make selection and maybe start to collect assets, maybe interview and outside stuff and group them together so you can find them via those kind of keywords. Whoops. So quality and version control can then come in, so you can start to look at the assets, maybe immediately see through the proxies stuff that's blurred and unusable. And then if you're going to have multiple versions of files that you're editing, you can manage those versions within the MAM and have keep previous versions available in the MAM software. Rights management and digital rights management becomes possible because any dates associated with licensed media clips and so on can be input as metadata into the MAM, so that you can see whether or not a given clip is something that you are able to use based on dates. And then kind of coming towards the end of the workflow in the processes, delivery. So it might be that you can export edit decision lists, which are files which you pull into your editing software that allow all of the subclips that you've selected within the MAM to be pulled into a project automatically without having to do much work. And then the archive side. So part of this process again will be archiving and deciding what kind of storage you want to archive off to and what the workflow will be, and how you'll pull stuff back out of the archive. So again, we'll have some examples of that. My non-MAM processes at the bottom are using an NLE, obviously, is outside of the MAM. Play out automation. There are various things that a MAM can plug into to hand over metadata and tasks, and then that software can look after that going forwards. So now a slide that's just illustrating some of the P5 integrations. So when I see P5 integration, I mean that we have a product called P5 Archive, and that has various integrations with these MAMs that you can see, plus a few others, including KYNO top right. And it means that the MAM integrates with P5 so that you can just, within the MAM, click and decide to archive some assets, or maybe a folder or many folders. And within a couple of clicks, you can then have P5 collect all the information about those assets that it needs to perform that archive and get on and do it without you having to actually drive P5 directly. So various different products there. These are all listed on the Archiware website. We'll send you a link to how to get back to this list after the webinar. So a little bit about P5 generally. Many of you that already use P5 will probably know some of this stuff, but P5 breaks down into 4 different modules. So going from left to right, we have P5 Backup, Archive, Synchronize, and Backup to Go. And just very briefly, because the focus of this is really around the P5 Archive product, P5 Backup is a disaster recovery tool. So this is more for making sure that all of the live storage that you're working with on site has a backup. So if you have a major failure, you can recover all of that data back. So P5 Archive is different to backup in that we're talking about moving media, generally media footage, from the storage that you're using to work and edit from to an offline storage, so that you can free up space on your online storage. So it's an online offline flow, and that's what P5 is all about. We'll see what that means in a minute. P5 Synchronize, a bit like backup, allows you to clone and replicate your data, but from disk to disk. So it creates another disk that becomes populated with the files and folders from your live storage. Quite often customers will use that to create an off-site clone of on-site storage if they have a nice fast internet connection, but it provides lots of interesting workflows to give you different kinds of backups. We'd always recommend 2 backups, so maybe using P5 Backup and Synchronize together. P5 Backup to Go is a workstation backup product, so that's for securing data that you might have on laptop and desktop machines. So that's a quick overview of the 4 P5 modules, and as it says at the bottom, these modules can all be run individually or in combination with each other to sort of build different types of workflows. There's lots of different possibilities. So P5 is quite platform agnostic. It runs on Windows, Mac OS, various flavors of Linux. Clients can be run on Solaris and FreeBSD, that's the red icon. And then over on the right-hand side, we're supporting QNAP, Synology and Netgear NAS devices. So we run on the NAS directly and provide access to all the storage that the NAS has that you've set up in there. So let's have a little look at a potential workflow before we actually start looking at software screens. The darker gray area on the left-hand side is my online workflow. So beginning with that, I have a LAN, which is the white lines here. These machines are connected via some kind of IP network. And well, let me just use this pointer. So my media asset management software is running on this host here, and I have some kind of storage set up for storing my video or media assets. So this is liable to be nice fast storage that people can edit from. And then hanging off of this LAN will be our edit workstations. And then in the diagram here, I've provided another host for our P5 archive server. It could be that these two bits of software are both running on the same host. They don't have to be on separate hosts, but it just depends on the scale of the installation as to how it would be split up. So at some point, some of the assets on this storage here will no longer need to be on the storage, either because they're just very large and not being used right now, or because the project has been completed and delivered, and so they need to be archived. So the archive process allows us to move assets from our online storage to our offline storage on the right-hand side. And this can either be disk or tape or cloud. So we support all 3 of those different types of storage. I would say tape is probably the most common storage used for archive right now because it has excellent capacity versus cost. But we have a lot of customers looking at cloud storage in addition to tape at the moment because the cost of cloud storage is coming down. So via our P5 archive server, we will be making a selection of assets via the MAM and sending those off to tape or disk or cloud. And once those assets have been archived, they will typically be removed from the online storage so that you get the benefit from the extra space freed up immediately. And then there will be a workflow either by using the P5 archive interface, web interface, or by using the MAM software, depending on which MAM software it is, to actually select the assets that you want to recover, and then they'll be located on tape or cloud or wherever they're living and brought back onto the online storage so that you could start another edit or another revision of a piece of work. So that gives us a sort of general overview of what to expect from a MAM product and what the integration with P5 involves and what archiving is. So now Robert's going to speak a little bit about his product, which is called KYNO, which we can see ahead of us here. Beginning with an overview, Robert, is that right? And then Robert's going to give us a demo of the product. And then we're going to come back to my end again so that I can show you how specifically we archive and restore assets in P5. So that should be all nice and interesting stuff. So Robert, over to you.
All right, let's just quickly go through some key points before we see the software in action. KYNO is a fast workflow media management tool for on-location or post-production use. Its scope is actually even a bit more general, but I'll get to that in examples. KYNO has users in 55 countries, has been on the market for 3.5 years now. The typical users range from video content producers, those could be filmmakers, documentary and fiction, or large-scale content producers like big YouTube channels, like for example, Linus Tech and a few others. Production companies ranging from really small production companies to the major ones, creative agencies, publishing houses, and at the end of the food chain, broadcasters like, for example, Al Jazeera or ABC News, and a number of other ones which unfortunately I'm not yet allowed to name publicly. We also have some rather non-media and entertainment customers, like political campaigns, like in the US, in the presidential campaign. We have sports clubs, fashion houses. It's really all over the place. Anyone who has to deal in a very pragmatic and fast way with lots of media assets, mostly video. The philosophy of KYNO is really to combine all the tools that are required between camera edit and archive. So workflows that typically involve a number of tools, typically 3 to 5, including playback, backup, logging, transcoding, archiving, or handoff to editing software or cloud platforms. And more or less the old days, the days before KYNO, you typically used those different applications and lost a lot of time and context and metadata jumping back and forth between those applications, essentially duplicating work. One of the things that makes it really, really attractive as an entry-level media management solution is it's really simple installation-wise. It's just a client-only installation, so there's no server or database you have to install or maintain. The setup is really just running an installer on each seat that wants to work with KYNO, and you point it to your drives and you start working immediately. So there's no manual reading, no configuration of any kind of database or schema or something like that. The drill down function, which you will see in action in less than 2 minutes, I'm estimating, turns drives essentially into MEMS. And one of the key USPs of KYNO is really that its user interface is so simple that it's suitable also for non-technical users. So we have a lot of companies who use it because they get their editorial staff, their production assistants, their directors, and lots of other people who are typically not well versed at using an editing program or something like Adobe Media Encoder. They feel comfortable using KYNO. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the advanced users, the editors, the ingest technicians, and people tweaking workflows who love the advanced features of KYNO and the flexibility that a lot of the functionality allows the advanced users. All right, then I think
Excellent.
it makes
Thanks, Robert.
sense to jump.
One thing I was just going to add that I forgot to mention at the top of the session is that we'll take questions at the end. So if any questions occur to anybody listening and watching, there's a questions panel within the GoToWebinar UI. You're welcome to just type the questions in there ahead of the questions slot at the end, and then we'll just go through them together and hopefully give you good answers to all the questions that you've typed in. So with that, we're now going to flick over to Robert's screen. So Robert, I am making you the presenter right now, and then we'll see Robert's demo, and then we'll come back to my screen.
Okay, is my screen live now?
Yep, I see that fine.
Okay, wonderful. Then, yeah, let's jump right into it. To understand KYNO is really easy if you've exposed to any basic software like Windows Explorer or Finder, because we use essentially the same metaphors. We have a tree that shows all the drives that are connected to the machine that KYNO is installed on, and we have what we call the workspace, which more or less is just a favorite section where I can register directories that play an important role in my workflow, so I don't have to navigate in large tree structures all the time, but I can, for example, have my marketing resources I need in all of my projects always registered up here. So more or less very, very similar to Windows Explorer and Finder.
So you typically, if you've got shared network folders that are being used, then you can add all of those into that list up at the top. So you would see the same stuff that you maybe see mounted on your desk, the desktop of your workstation.
Exactly, but it doesn't have to be top level folders. You can
Any
register
file.
any level folder. So in this case, for example, you see this is my home directory, subdirectory Lesspain, subdirectory workspaces, and that's the marketing folder that I register here. So to have the most efficient workflow, you really want to start at that part of the folder structure that you frequently access. All right. The difference between KYNO and a typical file browser is that it only shows you media assets. That is video files, audio files, and image files. And we start chronologically in a typical workflow example. That would be browsing camera media. In this case, I have an SD card connected to the computer, and I have material from a shoot that was shot using a Panasonic camera, using the log, using log formats. So you have those typical washed out colors here. What KYNO offers directly on your SD card without any previous ingest or offloading or cataloging step or proxy generation step is it allows you to play back the material in real time on any drive that's connected. It plays back directly the high-res footage. It has a player that has all the functionality you would expect from a professional player in editing software. That it's it has timecode support, it's frame accurate, it is very fast, it has built-in marker support, it has scrolling zoom support, and one of the big USPs of KYNO is the built-in support for lookup tables or LUTs. You can apply these in real time, which is for anyone working in production with these formats is a big time saver, because they can essentially just show their client or their director the material without an intermediate rendering or proxy generation or dailies generation step. Those are the little things that we take a lot of time to get really, really efficient. Another thing that people can do right on the SD card, if they choose to, is to add metadata. That is typical text-based metadata, rating certain metadata fields like camera angle, shot take, tags, or you can add time-based metadata, which well, another name for that is markers. And these operations work throughout the entire workflow. So you can have your staff add this metadata directly after the shoot, maybe on the plane already before this stuff is offloaded at the office, or you can do it at any other stage in the workflow. You can, as a next step, a typical next workflow step would be to make a verified copy of the material. That is the functionality that you know from tools like SilverStack, Hedge, or ShotPut Pro. That is a checksum verified copy using the same industry standard as those other players on the market. The good thing is it's integrated with the software that lets you quickly take a look at your material directly after the shoot, or even on location during the shoot. So it lets you back up to 3 copies or 4 copies to 4 different destinations using this optimized algorithm. I'm not going to show this in real time.
So my understanding of those media hash lists is that you generate like an MD5 type checksum from all the files and write those into a text file that sits alongside the video footage, and then when that's delivered somewhere else, you can just check that the hashes still match the video quite quickly, and then you know that every bit was copied correctly, and you don't have to worry about a file that maybe got corrupted across the wire.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
And now that you have performed that step and have peace of mind, and your your insurance company is happy, because that's actually something they require if they insure a film project. And you have typically offloaded your material to some production drive, which in many cases are SAN or NAS drives. Then what you typically run into is the problem of growing folder structures. So especially if you work in a team and you're pressed for time, what happens all of the time in those projects, anyone we talk to tells us this, is that you end up with those folder structures, and finding footage becomes a problem as far as productivity is concerned. And the function that KYNO offers to solve this problem is what we call drill down. It's activated up here using this button, and what this does is it gives you a flat view of the folder structure that you selected. You just saw that these folders now have an orange arrow icon, and you have this blue background. You can see that this entire substructure of the file system is now visible on the right-hand side, so you can browse this visually, and now you can combine this with filters. You could, for example, filter by file type up here, or you could to just see everything that was created in your project this week or today. You have those quick filters, those are quite powerful. Or you could start to apply even more metadata-based filters, like for example, to find any material that has exactly the 4K resolution. And then you can also combine this with text-based metadata. For example, you type in car. So this filter operation now filters using all the text-based metadata, which could be the file name itself, which could be a title or description or a tag or a marker, anything that's text-based. And that's a very pragmatic yet very powerful way of reducing the amount of footage that you need to scan visually to find what you're actually looking for, because it doesn't actually require a totally strict set of rules within your team. And everyone working in this industry knows that implementing such rules in a post-production project or in a production project in general, is a really hard thing. So this gets order into material on your production drive without you having to really build a database explicitly. And that's a big deal. That's why KYNO is a bit of an atypical MAM. You didn't see any explicit ingest step because we didn't have one. It's just we built this database on the fly. We build a cache on the fly, so things get faster and faster every time you scan your footage. And that, for many of our customers, replaces a larger scale MAM, or is the entry-level solution they try until at some point maybe they decide to switch to a larger MAM once they scale to hundreds of thousands of assets and want to do this in a less lightweight way. But this approach really is one of the fastest ways to turn your production drives into managed storage, essentially.
So basically, if I have access to the same LP media shared storage, let's say that we're looking at here, and I install KYNO on my Mac, and I point it at the same folder, then I'll see all of the metadata that you've assigned with the ratings and the subclips and so on, because all of that stuff is living on the file system with the files in a sidecar format. But my Mac will generate all of the previews itself and cache those so that they will be quick the next time I go there and looking at it. So basically, by just running the software on another workstation, I'll end up with the exact same view and access to all the same metadata that you have on yours, without there having to be a centralized kind of database server that I have to connect to.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
You just install it on all your added machines or machines that are somehow part of the workflow, access the shared storage, and you already have a working team metadata management solution or media management solution.
There's no great installation, a sort of engineering process to get this thing up and running. You just run the software and you're enjoying the benefits of it straight away.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Now back to one of the things that you, David, mentioned, and when you talked about what features a MAM has, and we talked about time-based metadata and subclips. This is something that I wanted to show in a bit more detail because it's one of the USPs in KYNO, because dealing with these things is particularly easy and efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I have here data from drone shoot, and drone shoots are notorious for their long takes. So what you typically have are those 5-10 minute takes, and the material you take out of these takes are typically far less than 10%, because you just keep the camera rolling and then hope for the pilot to shoot something that's nice, but typically those nice subclips are 5 or 10 seconds. So to find your way around in the material, one thing KYNO has is this time-based overview, which is very handy. And another thing is you can mark as more or less an advanced form of markers. You can mark subclips. That is an in and out point, and give those in and out points a name. And that way you can make your content so much more accessible, because you can just navigate it now, double-clicking those subclips, but you can reuse this kind of metadata in a very powerful way. And that was something that you mentioned in when you talked about NLE integration. You can, for example, in KYNO, which is absolutely built for batch operations, because that is really where the time savings and thus the money savings come from in applying such a system. You can send your entire rush to Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro or Resolve, and this metadata that you just saw will be translated to the metadata that the respective NLE understands. So in the case of Premiere Pro, you will have those subclips converted to markers with a duration. In the case of Final Cut, they will be converted to, that's your choice, range-based keywords or range-based favorites. And the thing is, if you do this logging in KYNO, you can send this time-based metadata to your editing project. If you have people working with different NLEs, which becomes more and more typical, you have a freelancer that does the Instagram clip in Final Cut, and you have the main project in Premiere Pro, you can reuse the same metadata, and it just works within the NLE. And as I said, 3 NLEs, Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, Resolve, they work with this.
So you basically you'd create your subclips in the MAM and then have access to that in whichever NLE you choose to use, rather than having to replicate the in and out points across multiple pieces of software, which, as you say, is just a time waste.
Exactly. And there's another approach. I mean, this approach, we keep the original footage and just use the subclips as metadata. Mm-hmm. But another thing that you can do is you can actually export the subclips that you marked as metadata and then have physical files on your drive. Mm-hmm. And if you want, throw away the rest. Or just, for example, if you're working in a distributed workflow, just send those 3 subclips to your editor via FTP or whatever transfer protocol, and just have them use those 3 clips from your 20-minute clip, complete the project for you. So if you want to do this, you can use the subclip export function, and yeah, you could, for example, export all your subclips in a batch operation using the ProRes proxy, and you have a very powerful naming engine that lets you have those clips mm-hmm. Exported as files
separate
adhering
files
to an
annotation. Yeah,
exactly.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I think how are we doing time-wise?
Yeah, I was going to say we're being conscious of time. We should probably push on, and I'll if it's okay with you, Robert, I'll start to show how we do a bit of archiving using KYNO back on
Absolutely. Just
system.
let me
Yep.
wrap it up with
Yep.
one or two sentences. I've only touched the basics. I mean, those are the most important features of KYNO. Definitely 80% of the benefit you get out of KYNO you have seen functionality-wise. There's a lot of stuff hidden in the menus that I can only encourage you to check out. If
There's
you
a trial
download
on your
KYNO,
website, isn't there?
yeah,
So people can
exactly.
get a 30-day, 28-day trial and just point it at a folder full of assets and start playing with it.
Yeah.
That's what I did, and I kind of found it to be really nice way of discovering it, just using it. Yeah.
And do reach out to us, and if you run into advanced questions, reach out to us and we will help you out.
Excellent. Right, I'm going to grab the screen back from you, Robert, and I'll just say that there you go. You can see my screen again. If anybody's short on time, we'll make a video and put it on YouTube with all of the questions at the end. So if anybody has to go, then not that I'm encouraging anybody to go, but if they do have to go, we'll send you a video link so you can watch the whole thing and share it with your colleagues as well, maybe. Right. So I'm just switching to my machine here where I have KYNO installed, and I also have Archiware P5 installed. So here's KYNO pointing at a folder on my desktop where I have some test data, which is some JPEGs and a movie. And I also have P5 running in the background here. Let's just refresh that. So that's going to work and log in with a username and a password into Archiware. So Archiware sits here and is going to receive some data that we'll be archiving in KYNO. And then once we've done that, we'll be able to see that the archive data within P5, and then we can effectively send it back to the file system so that KYNO sees it again. That's what I'm just going to show you now. So I have some assets here, and maybe I'm making some descriptions and titles. So maybe I'm going to put football in against this one here, and yeah, that's going to be fine. So I've made a little change. You can see there's a little icon against that image there because it's got some metadata assigned against it. I also have one of those drone clips here that has all of those sub clips sitting in here. But this project's complete now, right? So all of these assets, I don't need to use them anymore. Project's been delivered. So I'm going to pick up this folder here, and directly within KYNO, I'm going to send this to Archiware P5. And within P5, I can set up various different workflows. So I might have a tape archive. Maybe I want to do a tape and then a cloud archive, various different workflows, and you can choose the one that you want. So let's just kick that one off. And actually KYNO gives us, you see there's a job running bottom left here, and it tells me how far it's got. I can click on jobs and I can see a little progress bar. The last little phase of that archive will take a moment because that video file, the drone clip, is actually going to get transcoded by Archiware P5, just the first 30 seconds of it, so that even when that clip has been archived off of our nearline storage, our online storage, we can still look at it. So now you'll see I'm browsing the KYNO test data folder and it's empty. Likewise, if I was to look at this in the Finder, I'll also see that the KYNO test data folder is empty. So this has freed up space on my storage. And now by switching to Archiware and looking in Restore under Archive at the desktop, which is the folder that we were archiving, I can see my KYNO test data folder. It was archived at 3:38 UK time. And if I click in it now, this is where my assets are residing. So now I can see the assets inside of P5. Here is the DJI clip. So we can see there's the drone sitting on the floor, and you can see here we've generated a 30-second preview. So if I was coming back to this project at some point in the future and I'm curious, is this what I think it is? I can look in here and I can look at the assets themselves, even playback videos, and then be sure that this is what I want to recover. So given that, I can also search metadata in here as well. But if I decide that I now want to bring this back, this KYNO test data folder, I can do that just by clicking on Restore, and I could choose where I want it to go back to, but I want it to go back to the original location. So Archiware will just figure out which tape, which cloud volume or whatever is needed to recover the data, and it tells me that there's about 0.5 GB of stuff to recover. I hit the Start button. I can then monitor that job running inside of P5. This is all in the web interface, so all of the P5 configuration stuff that we're doing is in the web. If I now flick back to KYNO, we see the assets coming back. So KYNO actually gets triggered every time a file arrives in the folder that we're looking at. It sees that file arriving and pulls it back. Now, because KYNO writes the metadata that we have been assigning to assets into files within the Finder, into sidecar files, you'll see the word football comes back as part of this description for this image. It was restored alongside the file because KYNO writes all of this metadata onto the file system into a hidden folder. Likewise, our DJI drone footage comes back with all the subclips that it originally got archived with. So the round trip from the file system being administered via KYNO onto, let's say, an LTO tape managed by P5 and back again is as simple as I just showed you. It just took a few seconds once the archive plan is set up. And to be honest, the entire configuration of P5 to do this demo was just 5 minutes work. It's pretty simple. So unless you can think of anything that we should add there, Robert, I think that probably wraps things up as far as our discussion around MAM and how what MAMs do and how they integrate with P5. Does that seem okay for you?
Absolutely. One thing we should mention is that the version that we have been demoing is KYNO version 1.7, and the current version is 1.62. So 1.7 is coming out before IBC, so within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Just so people are not surprised when they go to the website and download a trial and
so if people just type
Archiware integration doesn't,
which I think is quite a unique word, they'll find KYNO Lesspain, and then there's the trial here, and it's 1.7. So this is 1.62. So they just need to wait a little while for the version with the integrations in it. And somebody did ask, actually, one of the questions that was typed in quite early was, is it cross-platform? So as you can see there, it is. And with that, actually, I'll go into the questions because there's a few questions that have been asked. Not many, actually. So so the other question that Mikhail asked was, is this a client-server based application? So hopefully from the demo that Robert gave, you see that the product is aiming to give the functionality of a client-server software without the need to have installing a server component on a machine on the LAN and then connecting the client machines to that server so that they all see the same data. So KYNO is writing the metadata, the kind of stuff that would normally be stored in a database, goes onto the file system in sidecar files alongside the assets so that your shared storage becomes effectively the database of the metadata. It sits there with the assets. And when you move a folder full of assets, you're moving the metadata with it. Next question, same question concerning P5. Is P5 a client server based and not web-based client? So yeah, just to give you a quick overview of the way P5 works, P5 is a server, a product which installs basically and runs as a server on a host, whether that's a Mac, a Windows, or a Linux host, or indeed a NAS device. And P5 sits on that host, is administered and configured and monitored through a web interface. So that means that anybody with an IP connection to this machine can access P5 and browse the archive maybe and recover files from the archive just using a web interface. So yeah, P5 is a client-server based product. KYNO is just installing the app on the workstations and then accessing the shared storage to get all the functionality of the database. I don't have any more. Oh, question just popped up. Not a question, it just says great, see you at IBC. So thanks for that. Right, so we're 45 minutes in. Those are all the questions right now. So unless anybody wants to quickly key in a question, which we will be happy to answer, we'll wrap up. So as I said, we will send you all a URL to a YouTube copy of this webinar so that you can share that with your colleagues or whatever. And both my email address and Robert's were at the top of the presentation, so you're welcome to get in touch with us. And I don't see any more questions appearing. Let me just double check. So with that, there is a question. I hadn't scrolled down. Are there any plans to integrate with a transcription service? Okay, so I guess this is talking about transcribing speech.
Yeah.
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 So,
I would assume so, because it's not the first time this question has been asked. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is we haven't made the decision when to put that on the roadmap. So we are in talks with third-party transcription services, and probably the ones that you are aware of, but we cannot commit to a release date yet.
okay. Thanks for that.
Can I add one more thing, David?
Of course, yeah.
If anyone wants to take a look at the Archiware integration before we launch, and definitely wants to test this within the next week or 2 weeks, contact us via the website, and we can make a beta version available to you guys.
Yeah, that's what I've been running, and I hadn't experienced any issues with it at all, to be honest. So yeah, I would encourage anybody interested to take a look at the beta. Okay, well, thanks, Robert. Thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody, for your time attending the webinar. And we'll see you at the next webinar, which I believe is after IBC. So we'll be publicising information. And also both KYNO and Archiware are at the IBC show. Indeed, we'll be demoing the KYNO integration on the Archiware booth. And are there other booths that you can be found on, Robert, at the show?
Yeah, that's the booth that you will find under the name Global Distribution.
Yeah.
On the website. I think that's all 7 A55.
Right. Yep. So have a look on the KYNO website to confirm where they can be found. So yeah, it'd be great to see anybody at the IBC show that's going to be there and have a chat about what we've got here. Okay, final little check from questions. The chap that asked the question about transcription says he's recommending Microsoft for speech transcription.
Thanks.
And another question from somebody else, when we need to reinstall Windows or Mac OS, so should we need to surrender the license, or can we formate direct without any take details? I'm not able to translate quite what's meant there, but I think the question is, can we move the licenses around different workstations once we've, if we need to reinstall our machine or move the license?
Yes, you can. You can reactivate on another machine.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
I think from what I recall looking on the website, you're allowing 3 installations from a single license. If somebody has like a desktop at work and a laptop that they run around with, you're happy for them to install in a couple of different machines.
Exactly. If you use the personal license for corporate licensing, the personal license is usually tied to a person.
Yeah.
So if you just have 10 edit bays that are used by 30 people, you typically buy a seat-based license, and that's a bit different, but there are different discounts for that.
Okay. Another question coming in hot off the press is, this is from Steve, is Archiware integration only in the beta version? So I think, well, I'll let you answer that, Robert.
Short answer, yes.
At the moment.
It will be launched with 1.7. The beta version is essentially our release candidate. The only reason why we haven't launched it is not maturity, but it's legal things that we need to wait for from third parties.
Okay. Right, well, we better wrap up before any more questions come in. Thanks again, everybody, and yeah, we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.